Hello, everyone. I hope you had a great Thanksgiving break and a great Thanksgiving with your families. This week, we are doing both the learning about assessment, so assessing your students' learning and using those results, and how to be successful in the rest of your pre-service classes in your first couple years being a teacher. So instead of having you read both chapters 13 and 14, I'm going to present the learning to you around assessment and using the results and ways in which you assess. I know a lot of you have a lot of questions about this, or we've brought this up a lot in discussion posts, is how do I know that my students are learning and meeting the standards? And then what do I do about it? And so I'm hoping to enlighten you and share some things. And then you will have a discussion post based on this, but I'm not expecting you to read chapter 13. If you want to, or you want to look through it, there's some good stuff. I am going to have you look at one of the charts within chapter 13, but then you'll be responsible this week for reading chapter 14. So this video is solely about assessing student learning and then using those results. So it used to be in education, everybody would just say, well, we test them. We test them, we turn in the grade. It's test day. Every Friday is a test day or whatever. It used to just be this event that would happen to students, and then the grade would go in the grade book, and that was it. Well, I taught it to them. They should have learned it. We're moving on. That has totally shifted in education. We've talked on this a little bit already. You've read and heard from Rick Wormeli in his philosophy of standards-based grading. We've talked about standards that students are expected to meet, not teachers expected to teach certain things. So our big focus and what I want you to take away from this course as far as assessment is, how do I use student work, observations, assignments, quizzes, specific questions and feedback to get a gauge of my students' current level of understanding, and then what do I do within my instruction to help them get where they're supposed to get to. Not just, well, they all got 50%, we're going to put that in the grade book and move on. So there's been a big shift in education since then. Okay, two terms that you have to know. And I know I've talked about these before. There's two types of assessments. There's formative assessment and there's summative assessment. Formative assessment is the one that you are going to use the most. Summative assessments is that event. So there are still summative assessments that we give. Final course grades. Maybe there's an end of course test that students are expected to take. That would be summative. You're not making any decisions based on that test to adjust instruction and help your students to learn or to be better or to meet the goal. Same thing with like our Iowa assessments or the MAP tests. Those are summative assessments. We get a score back on those. It's compared to all other students. That doesn't help us when we get the scores back as teachers in April. There's not a whole lot of time to make a lot of instructional decisions to help our students meet the standards. So most standardized tests are summative. They are one checkpoint. You get a score. It doesn't really help students know what they can and cannot do. So that's summative. Formative is what I want you to use all the time in your classrooms. So on a daily basis within each lesson, you're going to be formatively assessing. You're going to be using students' body language, observing what they're doing, questioning them, all those strategies to get a sense of where your students are at. And then you're going to use that information to adjust instruction tomorrow. So if your students are getting it faster than what you think they were, even within the lesson, you need to have the skills to adjust and jump forward. Or, oh my gosh, my students are struggling. I have to figure out a different way to present this information or teach them a different strategy so that they can do what they're expected to do. Okay, it might be you give a weekly quiz that you track, maybe not as a grade in the grade book, but you track, or students track their progress towards their standards. Those are formative assessments. Formative assessments are usually not graded. In standards-based situations, they are graded, and then the next time that you assess on that standard, doing better then replaces that score. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about grading. Grading and assessment are two different things. Okay, I really want to focus on assessment. And assessment is collecting evidence of where your students are in regard to the standards and goals that you have set for them. So collecting evidence of what your students are learning. Okay, formative assessment is a process. You're getting a handle on where your kids are, where you're going to go next. Do you need to speed it up? Do you need to make it more challenging? Do you need to come up with a different way to teach it because you totally missed the boat with your kiddos? And how to meet their needs so that they are meeting the goals you have set for them. Formative assessments show you progress. So one example would be reading words per minute. So if you're a lower elementary teacher and the goal is set for per grade level how many words they need to read per minute, you would test students maybe on a weekly basis, and they would chart that, and then you would be able to see their growth. In sports, we do this all the time. So you shoot free throws every day, and you chart how many you make out of 100. And then hopefully you see progress. Same thing in the classroom. It's gauging the progress of our students. Growth mindset is a huge piece here. Carol Dweck, we've talked about this a lot in her research. So how you set up your expectations in your classroom, in the ways that you use assessments, in the ways that you teach students to assess themselves and use the assessments for themselves, will lead them to a growth mindset. So this whole research is kind of why we've had this big shift in education, because it used to be, oh, you're bad at math. You got 50% on all the last tests. That's a bummer. You're never going to be good at math, which is a fixed mindset compared to a growth mindset. Okay, you struggled a lot on your fractions test that we took last week. We're going to work every day for a short amount of time on fractions, and then I'm going to assess you again, give you another test, and see if you could do better. That's growth mindset. And then keep doing that over and over and over again until that student can do whatever you need them to do with fractions. Okay, what should you know as a first-year teacher? You need to know that there are a variety of ways to formatively assess students. Like I've said, observations, body language, you've all brought those up. Different questions that you're asking, clickers that you might use, you're probably going to experience those in college. So a lot of schools have purchased clickers, and you ask a question, multiple choice, and everybody clicks in B, and then instantly you can see whether your students are getting whatever concept or not. Questions that you ask them verbally, questions that you ask them to respond to, and then you collect and read at the end of the lesson. In art, like Mackenzie, I know you want to teach art. It's probably observing what they're doing. So if you're wanting them to learn a specific shading technique, you're watching your students do that and then giving them feedback to help them do it better and better and better within each project. That's a way to formatively assess. The feedback that you give students is crucial. So let's go back to our fractions example. If I'm the student that struggles with fractions in your classroom, and you give me the test, and then you say, okay, Joni, you struggled with fractions. I want you to work on fractions, and then I'm going to give you another test. How do you think I'm going to do on that test? If I'm not getting feedback and instruction from a teacher, I'm going to do the same exact way that I did the first time. What would you expect? But if you are the teacher and you're helping me in your classroom understand fractions, you're going to give me feedback, questioning, helping me to understand fractions. Feedback being, could be a new lesson. It could be looking at my work and then pointing out things that I'm doing really well and things that I need to shift, like maybe I'm not understanding a part of fractions. So that feedback piece is huge. Here's another shift. So instead of just reporting that score in the grade book, interpreting the score. So when you give a test, which you're going to give tests, and that's fine. Let's say you give a 5-question test on something. You want to know if students are learning some concept that you're teaching. Let's take social studies, because we're all, well, except for Mackenzie, we're all probably going to teach social studies. Kennedy wants to teach high school social studies. So if you're testing something in social studies, you ask 5 questions. Students respond to your 5 questions. You score them all, and a majority of your students get 3 out of 5. Then you start asking yourself questions. Which ones did they miss? Why did they miss those? Was it a confusing question? If everybody missed the same one, did they understand what you were asking? Were they confusing it with something else? So then you have to start interpreting why they responded the way that they did. And was that an issue of you being the creator of the test? Or was it an issue of your student's gap in their understanding? So you need to adjust instruction and figure out a way to help them understand whichever piece of that assessment they weren't getting. So it's more than just checking, much, much more than just checking. Okay, here's something I want you to think about. So our whole goal as a teacher is to help students learn. That's our job. That's what we love. We love kids. We want to help them be the best possible people that they can be. So our job is to help them be the best possible people they can be. Well, with assessment, we're trying to get evidence of what they know and can do. Sometimes we have students that struggle with writing. Some of you might be like that. You might be more comfortable speaking. You might be more comfortable drawing. You might be more comfortable writing. Whatever it might be, I challenge you to think about, can you have your students show you what they're learning in whatever way they want? So let's go back to the social studies. And if I'm having them learn a concept of evaluating the causes and effects of wars within American history, can I give students the choice to show me that they can evaluate the causes and effects of wars in American history? So I'd say you can write an essay, you can give an oral presentation, you can create a graphic novel, but it's got to have these components in showing me that you can evaluate. And then you might leave it up. Some students might come up with it like they're going to write a song because they're super musically talented. But I challenge you to think about that. Because our whole mission is to try to figure out what students can and cannot do, or don't know, or do know. And if I ask them to write all the time and they're not great writers, I'm not getting a very good sense of what they can and cannot do. Something to think about. Okay, on page 455 in your book, please check out this table. You have been asking over and over again, like, how am I going to know if students are getting it? This is a great table. I'd take a picture of this because I know you're going to turn your books in. Take note of it somewhere. It's a really good table of different ways that within lessons you can formatively assess. Okay, last piece for assessment. Which assessment is collecting evidence of what your students can and cannot do or don't know. So it might be twofold. It might be skills, so what they can and cannot do. Might be knowledge. What do they know? What do they not know? But I want you to think about growth mindset is a connection that we've had to assessments. So this whole idea that everyone can learn. It might take some students longer than others, but everyone can learn, and it's our job to help them by the end of the year master those standards that are expected. Think about and go back to that information on Rick Wormeli, the standards-based grading philosophy. Take a look at that. Think about that, reflect on that as you continue with your courses and in your field experiences in student teaching. Also, we talked a couple weeks ago about Bloom's higher order thinking skills and Webb's depth of knowledge. When you're the one creating the assessments, which you're going to be sometimes, depending on your district, you might be given benchmark assessments, which might be given quarterly. You might be given different kinds of assessments that you have to give if you're in a big district. But if you're in a small district, you're probably creating your own. So understanding Bloom's higher order thinking skills and Webb's depth of knowledge in the way that you create questions will be crucial. So assessment is a huge part of our job, but it's to help our students grow. That's the goal. It's collecting evidence of what our students can and cannot do. If you have any questions about assessment, please let me know. Again, you're more than welcome to read chapter 13. There's a lot of great stuff in it, or skim and scan, but this is the main ideas that I wanted you to take away from assessment.